Frank McCourt, author of Angela's Ashes. Right before the show started, somebody said to me, if I ask you where this cover came from, it would tick you off.
That would, yeah.
Why?
I've been asked a million times. Well, it doesn't look like me anyway. That kid looks too well fed.
Who is the kid?
I don't know. Something Scribner came up with. Some urchin from some strange place. It does look like Limerick. It could be me. It looks like some lane in Limerick. But he looks too. But I never had bare feet. My mother always made sure that we had shoes, even though they were falling off our feet. But other kids went around barefoot, but we didn't. We were too snobbish.
So when you saw this book, you didn't know that this picture, where it came from or who it was?
No, I had no idea at all. There was some dispute about it. My wife said that it's wrong to put some unknown kid. She wanted them to put me on. But they decided they liked it. And people like it in general. It gives the flavour of the book. Cunning, furtive kid on the street.
When did you get the first idea that you wanted to do something like this?
Write this book?
Uh-huh.
First of all, I always wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know that I wanted to write about this lane in Limerick, this slum. Because anybody who comes from those circumstances doesn't want to write about it. You're ashamed of it. You don't have any self-esteem. So it wasn't until I somehow began to gain some approval or acceptance from my students in New York or for friends of mine in social circles. I started talking about growing up in Limerick, and I suppose some of the stuff I told them was amusing and they'd laugh. Because the whole poverty is so absurd. Some of the stories I told them were so absurd, they'd laugh and they'd say, you should write this. When are you going to write a book? I've been hearing this for years. When are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? But no more insistent than a little voice in my head, write the damn book. And I've tried it over the years. I wrote a version of it in 1969, I think, called If You Live in a Lane. But it was derivative, imitator. I was imitating everybody, O'Casey and Joyce and Hemingway and Evelyn Waugh. Imagine me writing like Evelyn Waugh. I tried to be smart-ass, upper-class British writer. None of it worked until eventually I found my own way.
Where is the high school you taught in?
In New York, East 15th Street, 15th and 1st Avenue. But that wasn't the only one I taught. I think I was in 3 different high schools. McKee Vocational on Staten Island, Seward Park on the Lower East Side, briefly in Fashion Industries High School on West 24th Street, and then in Stuyvesant High School.
How many years?
A total of 20, well, close to 30, including substitute teaching.
So when did you sit down and first start putting words on paper for this book?
For this one, that version I did, If You Live in a Lane, in 1960. No, it goes way back. It goes way back to my 20s when I started jotting things in notebooks, things that my mother said, sayings from the neighbours. Because there was a lot of funny stuff, despite the poverty. We had a lot of eccentrics wandering around Limerick. Who, if they were here, they'd be locked up yesterday. But there were characters all over the place.
Who's this?
Oh God, that's my mother in the middle. That's when my brother Mike got married. He's the one to my mother's right. My brother Alfie is on the left, Mike, Malachi, and myself, and my mother. That was Mike's wedding about 32 or 33 years ago. His first wedding.
Where are your brothers today?
Malachi, the bearded one, is in New York. He's an actor. He's writing a book. And Alfie, Mike runs a bar and restaurant out in San Francisco, Seal Cove Inn. And Alfie, they all went into the bar business. People used to say, well, when are you going into the bar business? I said, well, my brothers go become teachers. Alfie, we had great hopes for him because he's the only one who had any kind of education. He went to secondary school in Ireland, he came over, and we all thought he was going to go to Columbia. He went to Columbia briefly, and we thought he'd become a lawyer or something like that, but instead he opened a Mexican restaurant. the only Irishman you ever met that opened a Mexican restaurant.
And it's still there in New York?
No, it's gone now.
No, gone?
Los Panchos. It was very popular on the Upper West Side.
Who's this?
That's my mother.
When was this taken?
I think that was...
It says on the back, 1979.
Some bar on 3rd Avenue. We would take her out occasionally. She loved going out because she enjoyed the good time. You could see she was a large woman, That, of course, that was because she was sedentary. But she loved parties.
How many children did she have in her life?
7,
How many of them are alive today?
4.
What happened to the other 3?
Well, she had 6 children in 5.5 years, and they were including twins, and 3 of them died in that 5.5 years. Margaret, the little girl, and the twin. Margaret died in Brooklyn, and the twins died in Ireland. So they died of probably bronchial pneumonia or something like that, something preventable. And that's what the death of the little girl, I think, drove my father crazy, because he was mad about her. And I know that. I remember the kind of attention he paid her, which he didn't pay us. He was very good to us. He was a very kind gentleman when he was sober, my mother went into a deep depression. Now, if the death of the little girl drove them into a depression and drove him to the bottle, you can imagine what it was like then when the twins died in Ireland.
What year did the children die?
Margaret died in 1934, I think, and the twins in 35. Oliver died in May of 35, and Eugene November 35. And in the meantime, my mother got pregnant again, the month that Oliver died.
And where do you fit in the family of
I'm
7?
the oldest.
You're the oldest.
Yeah.
Who's this?
Oh, God. That's my father. I don't know who he's holding there.
Fiona.
Oh, Fiona, yeah. That's Malachy's granddaughter. That was taken in Belfast just before he died, I think. Yeah. He lost all his hair. And he had an accent that was indecipherable. You'd need subtitles to hear him. So that's in Belfast where he died. He made his way, he went off to England during the war and knocked around there and got into trouble drinking. Made his way back to his father's farm where my grandmother was, and then wound up in Belfast in the pension.
When was the last time you saw him?
In his coffin in 1985. Before that, I saw him in 1971 when Belfast was erupting. It was the worst summer they had.
What was your relationship with him at the end?
Inconsequential. I never saw him. If I did see him, it was a formal conversation. It was very hard to get into an intimate conversation with him. And if I were to look at this from the outside, I would say to myself, so why didn't you go back and talk to him? But I think I had a feeling that there was no point in it, or that he wouldn't come through. He was so blocked in every way. He'd say, well, how's your mother? And how's your brothers? And and that was it. And then he'd look out the window and he'd drink his tea, and there was no getting through to him.
Were you ever close to him?
I wasn't when I was a kid. I think I was close to him.
There was a time in the book where you talk about he kissed you for the first time.
In the hospital, when I had typhoid fever. This is a national characteristic, I think, of the Irish, this poetic, mercurial, flamboyant race. We don't go around saying, I love you. The word love was something that was reserved for God or babies. I love you, darling. You talk to babies, or maybe horses that win, but not for personal relationship. I used to think when I was a kid, when people said, I love you, that was only for something on the screen at the Lyric Cinema. We never heard it. I never heard a mother saying, I love you to her child. And my brother Malachy once had an experience. He was 9. I think this may have changed the course of his life somehow, emotionally. He was in the kitchen, he was 9 years old, and he said to my mother, he was overwhelmed for some reason, and he said to my mother, Ma'am, I love you. And she looked at him. And then later on, he's there at the kitchen fiddling around, and her friend Bridie Hannon comes in from next door, and my mother says, Bridie, do you know what he just said to me? What, Angela? He told me he loved me, and the two of them had a good laugh, and I think Malachy sank through the floor. So you had to be careful about telling people you loved them.
What's this?
Oh, God. Yeah, that's the Mungret graveyard where we took my mother's ashes to be sprinkled. It's an old medieval abbey outside Limerick. So she died in New York, and we had her cremated, and we took her back there. She used to say, I want to be buried with my own people in Mungret. I said, and she was a large woman, as you saw from that earlier picture. I said, do you know the cost of transporting your body to Ireland?